the first thing I noticed was the ring, which was strange, because I had spent most of my adult life carefully avoiding anything that looked like a permanent decision. It was a thin silver band, cheap enough to have come from a gift shop beside a gas station. But there it was, catching the pale Las Vegas sunlight on my left hand like it had every right to belong there. For 3 full seconds, I stared at it with the blank, peaceful confusion of a man whose brain had not yet agreed to participate in the morning. Then the headache arrived. It rolled in behind my eyes like a parade float covered in glitter and regret. I pushed myself up on one elbow and immediately regretted that too. The hotel room around me looked like the aftermath of a very polite disaster. 2 half-melted cherry slushies sat on the nightstand. A white cowboy hat hung from the lamp. Someone had balanced a tiny plastic bride and groom on top of the TV remote. At the foot of the bed, my best friend, Miles Carter, was asleep in an armchair with his long legs folded at an angle that would have sent any normal person to urgent care. He was still wearing yesterday's white dress shirt, wrinkled at the sleeves, open at the collar, and completely innocent of the emotional crime scene surrounding us. I opened my mouth to say his name, but my voice came out like a receipt being crumpled. My phone buzzed against my hip. I grabbed it, hoping for a normal emergency, like a missed call from my editor or a reminder that I had forgotten to water my basil plant again. Instead, the screen showed an email with the subject line, "Congratulations from Moonlight Vows Chapel." My stomach dropped through all 32 floors of the hotel. I tapped it with a shaking thumb. There we were in a photo, standing under a plastic arch of pink roses, Miles smiling softly at me laughing so hard my eyes were nearly closed, both of us holding up our left hands. Below the photo, in cheerful gold letters, were the words, "Marriage certificate submitted." "No," I whispered. Miles stirred. His gray-blue eyes opened slowly, calm and clear in a way that felt deeply unfair. He looked at me, then at my hand, then at his own matching ring. "Please tell me we didn't," I said. Miles sat up, his expression unreadable, and after a long, quiet moment, he said, "We did. And before you ask, Evan, I remember everything." For a moment, neither of us moved. The air conditioner hummed above the window, pushing out air that smelled faintly like dust and lemon cleaner, while the city beyond the curtains kept glowing like nothing life-changing had happened overnight. Miles was sitting across from me with one hand resting on his knee, the silver ring plain and impossible on his finger. He did not look embarrassed. He did not look amused. Worst of all, he did not look surprised. That was when my heart began doing something strange, something soft and frightened beneath the panic. Because I knew Miles Carter better than I knew almost anyone, and Miles only got that quiet when he was holding back the truth. We had met 11 years earlier in Cannon Bay, Oregon, in the back row of sophomore biology, where I was drawing cartoon frogs in the margin of my notes, and he was correcting the teacher under his breath because the diagram on the board was technically inaccurate. He had been all sharp elbows, serious eyes, and grief he did not know how to carry after losing his mother that spring. I had been the loud, artsy kid with paint on my sneakers and a talent for making jokes exactly 3 seconds before crying. We should not have made sense together, but somehow we did. I taught him how to skip rocks at the marina, even though he calculated the angles before every throw. He taught me how to change a flat tire in the high school parking lot, while I kept insisting cars were just metal horses with trust issues. When my first art portfolio was rejected by every summer program I applied to, Miles showed up at my house with grocery store cupcakes and said, very seriously, that all those programs clearly had poor taste. When his father forgot his birthday because he was buried under work and sadness, I dragged Miles to the beach with a thermos of hot chocolate and a blanket that smelled like my grandmother's laundry soap. We did not talk much that night. We just sat shoulder to shoulder and watched the waves turn silver. Under the moon. That was the thing about us. We were never dramatic in the way people expected. There were no grand speeches, no movie rain, no one running through an airport. There was just Miles keeping an extra hoodie in his truck because I was always cold. There was me learning the exact silence that meant he was overwhelmed and needed someone to sit beside him without asking questions. There were years of grocery runs, late-night diner pancakes, moving boxes up 3 flights of stairs, emergency contacts, inside jokes, and birthday cards signed from one entire soul to another. Everyone saw it. His sister Chloe saw it first, of course, because Chloe Carter had the emotional subtlety of a marching band. She used to lean across Thanksgiving dinner and say, "When you two finally become legally recognized as a weather system, I want credit." Miles would roll his eyes. I would laugh too loudly. Then somebody would mention a girl he had dated in college, or an ex-girlfriend from Seattle, and the little dangerous hope in my chest would fold itself back into a drawer. Miles was straight. That was the fact around which I had arranged my self-control. It was not tragic exactly. It was just weather. You do not blame the rain for being rain. You learn to carry an umbrella. So I became very good at loving him in ways that had other names. Loyalty, friendship, habit, family. I told myself those words were enough, and most days they were. Then he asked me to come to Vegas for Chloe's wedding, because his +1 had canceled, and because, in his exact words, "You are better at small talk with relatives who ask invasive questions." I said yes because I always said yes to Miles. I packed my best Navy suit, my sketchbook, and every feeling I had no intention of unpacking. Now, sitting in a hotel room with a plastic cowboy hat on the lamp and a marriage certificate in my email, I looked at the boy who had become the man I trusted most in the world and realized the old rules had not just bent. They had disappeared. Miles rubbed his thumb slowly over the ring, still watching me like he was afraid one wrong word would send me running. "How much do you remember?" he asked. I swallowed. Enough to know I should remember more. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "That sounds like you." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to throw a pillow at him. I wanted to ask why his voice sounded tender instead of terrified. Instead, I looked back down at the photo from the chapel, at the way his hand had been wrapped around mine, steady and sure, and whispered, "Miles, what did we do?" He took a breath, and for the first time that morning, his calm cracked just enough for me to see the fear underneath. "I think," he said quietly, "we stopped pretending for one night." Chloe Carter's wedding had been designed with the kind of joyful precision that made every single person involved mildly afraid of her. She had chosen a rooftop venue 12 stories above the Las Vegas Strip, where strings of warm lights crisscrossed over white linen tables and little glass jars of desert flowers trembled in the evening breeze. The city shone below us in pink, gold, and electric blue, loud enough to feel unreal. But somehow Chloe had made the whole place feel like a backyard dinner party with better shoes. I remembered that part clearly. I remembered Miles standing beside me in his charcoal suit, looking so unfairly handsome that I had spent most of the ceremony pretending to be deeply interested in the floral arrangements. I remembered Chloe walking down the aisle, laughing before she even reached her future wife, because a gust of wind had lifted her veil and wrapped it around her father's face. I remembered Miles leaning close to whisper, "Statistically, this is already more successful than most engineering projects," and me snorting so hard that an ant in the second row turned around to glare. It had been safe then, or at least I had believed it was. Weddings were dangerous places for people with hidden feelings. They made everything glow. They turned ordinary eye contact into poetry and bad dance moves into meaningful memories. So I had made rules for myself before we even left Portland. Do not stare at Miles during the vows. Do not imagine what his hand would feel like during the first dance. Do not drink enough champagne to start saying honest things. I broke the first rule in 7 minutes and the second before dinner. The third took longer, mostly because Miles kept replacing my glass with water whenever he thought I was not paying attention. "I am a grown man," I had told him. "You once cried because a grocery store discontinued your favorite soup," he said. "That was a seasonal betrayal." He smiled then. That small private smile he gave almost nobody, and I felt the familiar ache bloom behind my ribs. After dinner, Chloe dragged us onto the dance floor because she said the professional photos needed more emotional support goblins. Miles hated dancing. He approached rhythm the way some men approach tax forms, with suspicion and quiet resentment. But he danced with me anyway, one hand careful at my shoulder, the other holding mine like he was solving something delicate. Around us, people laughed, glasses clinked, and someone's uncle attempted a line dance with tragic confidence. I should have been fine. I had survived years of almost moments. But then a slow song came on, old and soft, the kind played in every American wedding movie when the characters finally stop lying to themselves. Miles did not step away. Neither did I. "You okay?" he asked. "Sure," I lied. "Just emotionally allergic to string instruments." His thumb brushed once across my knuckle, so lightly I could have pretended it was accidental. Evan. That was all he said, just my name, but the way he said it made the room tilt. I looked up at him and found something unfamiliar in his face, not confusion, not pity, not the easy affection I knew how to survive. It was wanting, quiet and scared, and almost gone before I could trust it. Then Chloe appeared between us with 2 paper fans and a camera, shouting that the newlyweds demanded a group photo, and the moment dissolved into laughter before either of us could ruin or save ourselves. Later, after the cake, after the speeches, after Miles's father hugged Chloe for so long that everyone pretended not to cry, we walked out into the warm Nevada night. The strip was buzzing with music and tourists and neon signs promising luck in every direction. Miles had loosened his tie. I had taken off my dress shoes and was carrying them in one hand because my feet had officially resigned. "You are walking barefoot on a Las Vegas sidewalk," Miles said. "This is how medical documentaries begin. Then carry me, Carter." I said it as a joke. I always said things as a joke when I meant them too much. But Miles stopped walking. For one strange second, under the glow of a giant sign shaped like a moon, he looked as if he might actually do it. Instead, he took off his own jacket and draped it around my shoulders. It smelled like cedar, hotel soap, and him. "There," he said softly. "Compromise." I pulled the jacket tighter and looked away before my face could confess everything. We wandered without a plan, past souvenir shops and fountains, past couples taking blurry selfies, past a street musician playing a love song on a saxophone that sounded a little lonely and a little hopeful. Then we saw the chapel. Moonlight Vows was tucked between a taco place and a 24-hour pharmacy, glowing pink and blue like a secret somebody had forgotten to hide. On the sign out front, in curling white letters, it said, "Marry your best friend tonight." I laughed first. Of course I did. "Imagine the tax benefits," I said. Miles looked at the sign for a long time. Too long. Then he said, "Imagine not having to explain why you are always my emergency contact." I turned toward him, ready with another joke, but the words disappeared, because he was not smiling anymore. The chapel door chimed when we stepped inside, and the sound was so small and cheerful that it made the whole thing feel harmless. That was probably why I did not turn around. Moonlight Vows looked less like a legal institution and more like the inside of a birthday cake. The walls were painted soft pink, the ceiling glittered with tiny plastic stars, and a fake moon hung over a narrow aisle lined with silk roses that had seen better decades. Behind the front desk sat a woman in her 60s wearing rhinestone glasses and a cardigan covered in embroidered cats. She looked up from a crossword puzzle and smiled as if 2 emotionally confused men walking in after midnight was the most normal thing in Nevada. "Well, hello, sweethearts," she said. "Are we celebrating love, impulse, or both?" "Mostly air conditioning," I said, because my mouth had apparently decided to operate without adult supervision. Miles glanced at me, and the corner of his mouth lifted. "We saw the sign." "Everyone sees the sign," she said. "Only the brave ones open the door." That should have been our cue to laugh and leave. Instead, we stood there under the fake stars, neither of us moving. My bare feet were cold against the checkered tile. Miles's jacket was still around my shoulders. Somewhere outside, the strip kept roaring with music and traffic, but inside the chapel, everything felt strangely hushed, like the world had stepped into another room to give us privacy we had not asked for. The woman introduced herself as Marlene and handed us a laminated menu of ceremony options. There was the classic Moonlight, the Neon Forever, and something called the Elvis Adjacent, which legally could not include an actual Elvis, but apparently included strong Elvis energy. I laughed so hard I had to lean against the desk. Miles took the menu from my hand and read it with the grave concentration of a man reviewing building permits. "You are taking this very seriously," I said. "Marriage is a structural commitment," he replied. "Please never say that in a vow." Marlene looked between us with the knowing patience of someone who had watched thousands of people pretend not to be in love. "You boys want a souvenir photo, or are you going all the way?" I opened my mouth to make another joke, but Miles answered first. "What would all the way require?" My heart stumbled. Marlene explained the paperwork, the identification, the county filing, her voice warm and practical. I kept waiting for Miles to wave it off, to say he was only curious, to rescue us both from the edge of whatever this was becoming. He did not. He reached for his wallet. Miles, I said softly. He looked at me then, really looked, and the noise in my head went quiet. We do not have to, he said. I know. If you want to leave, we leave. I know. Evan. My name again, gentler this time. The kind of sound a person makes when they are trying to hand you the truth, without breaking it. I should have asked him what he meant. I should have asked if he was confused, if this was grief from the wedding, if the lights and music and champagne had made us both reckless. Instead, I looked at our reflection in the glass of a framed chapel certificate. Me with his jacket around my shoulders, him standing close enough that our arms nearly touched, both of us looking less like two people making a joke and more like two people who had finally run out of excuses. This is insane, I whispered. Probably, he said. You were supposed to be the responsible one. I am trying something new. That made me laugh, but my eyes burned at the same time. Marlene gave us 2 silver rings from a little velvet tray, simple and bright under the fluorescent lights. Mine was slightly too big. Miles noticed immediately and turned it once around my finger, careful as always. The ceremony itself was short. At least, that was what I remembered in pieces. Marlene's kind voice. The plastic roses. The fake moon above us. My own nervous laughter filling the tiny room whenever silence got too honest. Then she asked if we wanted to say anything to each other. I remembered looking at Miles and thinking of 11 years stacked behind us like postcards. Rain on the Oregon coast, diner coffee at 2 in the morning, moving boxes, hospital waiting rooms, birthday candles, quiet car rides. All the ordinary days he had made bearable just by being there. You make ordinary days feel survivable, I said, and the words came out before I could hide them. Miles's face changed. Not dramatically. Miles never changed dramatically. But something in him opened, soft and terrified and steady all at once. He took both my hands in his. You make ordinary days feel like something I want to come home to, he said. I forgot how to breathe. Marlene sniffled behind her rhinestone glasses. Somewhere, a tiny printer began spitting out a certificate that looked too cheerful for the size of what had just happened. And when Miles slid the ring onto my finger, he did it slowly, with full attention, as if even in the strangest chapel in Las Vegas, under a fake moon and a ceiling of plastic stars, he understood exactly what he was choosing. By the time we flew back to Portland, the ring had stopped feeling like a joke and started feeling like a question I was carrying on my hand. Neither of us talked much on the plane. Miles took the window seat because he knew I hated watching the wings shake during turbulence, and I pretended not to notice that he ordered ginger ale for me before the flight attendant reached our row. It was exactly the kind of thing he had always done, small and practical and quiet enough to deny if anyone called it love. Back home, rain tapped against the airport windows, soft and steady, as if Oregon had decided to welcome us with something familiar. I thought the familiar would help. It did not. The familiar made everything worse. My apartment still smelled like coffee grounds, watercolor paper, and the basil plant I had almost killed, but not quite. My unfinished sketches were spread across the kitchen table. A nervous little fox staring at the ocean, a lighthouse with windows shaped like stars, a crooked house on a hill that I had drawn and redrawn for months without knowing why it never looked finished. Miles stood in the doorway with his suitcase, too tall and solid for my cluttered living room, and suddenly the space felt less like mine and more like something waiting to become ours. We should call someone, I said. A lawyer, Miles replied. I meant a priest, a therapist, or maybe Chloe, if we want to be emotionally interrogated before lunch. Lawyer first, he said, because of course he did. The attorney's office was downtown, tucked between a tax preparer and a coffee shop that sold muffins the size of softball gloves. Her name was Linda Park, and she had the calm, efficient energy of a woman who had seen every possible version of human panic across a desk. She looked over our paperwork, adjusted her glasses, and said, "The good news is that this is valid. The complicated news is also that this is valid." I made a sound that might have been laughter if it had been less tragic. Miles sat beside me with perfect posture, hands folded, jaw tight. Linda explained that an annulment was possible, but not instant, especially because the filing had already gone through, and because Miles was in the middle of a mortgage and insurance review for the old craftsman house he had just bought in Northeast Portland. Any sudden change in marital status could create extra paperwork, delays, and questions from lenders who already treated every document like it might explode. 30 days would make this cleaner, she said. Live your lives. Do not make any impulsive financial decisions. Do not throw a second wedding. Then come back. I looked at Miles. That was very specific. Linda did not smile. You would be surprised. So we made a plan, because plans were safer than feelings. 30 days. No public announcement. No dramatic decisions. No pretending this was more than an administrative inconvenience with matching jewelry. Miles's house was half renovated, with exposed pipes, covered floors, and a kitchen that currently existed only as a hopeful outline in blue tape. So he brought 2 suitcases and a box of work files to my apartment. Temporary, he said, setting them by the couch. Obviously, I said, while my heart behaved like an idiot. The first night, we ordered Thai food and ate it on the floor because my table was buried under sketches. Miles sorted the takeout containers without asking, putting the pad see ew closer to me and the green curry closer to himself. You remembered, I said. You always say curry tastes like spicy grass. It does. That is a terrible opinion. It is a consistent opinion. He almost smiled. I almost forgot to be scared. Over the next few days, married life looked suspiciously like our old friendship wearing softer clothes. Miles fixed the loose cabinet hinge that had been complaining for 6 months. I labeled one shelf in the bathroom, emotionally unavailable engineer products, and watched him move his toothbrush there without protest. He woke early and made coffee. I stayed up late painting the little fox, giving it Miles's serious eyebrows by accident. On Thursday, rain came down hard enough to blur the windows, and a soaked orange cat appeared on the fire escape, yelling like he paid rent. Miles opened the window while I grabbed a towel. We are not adopting a cat, he said. 10 minutes later, he was holding the cat like a fragile building inspection and asking what cats ate. Waffles, I said. That is not a food recommendation. No, that is his name. Miles looked down at the cat, who was already purring against his shirt. Temporary, he said again. But this time, neither of us believed him. By the second week, the apartment had learned Miles's rhythm. The old pipes knocked at 6:15 every morning, right before his alarm. The coffee maker sighed at 6:20. Waffles, who had accepted temporary residence with the confidence of a retired landlord, pawed at Miles's bedroom door at 6:23 because he had discovered the tallest person in the apartment was also the easiest to intimidate. I would hear Miles murmur, "We do not negotiate before coffee," followed by the soft clink of a food bowl. I should have found it ridiculous. I did find it ridiculous. I also found myself lying very still under my blanket, smiling at the ceiling like a person with no survival instincts. Domesticity was dangerous because it did not announce itself. It slipped in through ordinary things. An extra mug beside the sink. A pair of work boots by the door. A grocery list in Miles's square handwriting with oat milk, cat food, and Evan deadlines underlined twice. He never asked if I needed help with my book project. He simply noticed when I forgot dinner and placed a plate beside my sketchbook. He noticed when I rubbed my right wrist after hours of drawing and ordered a better brace without saying where it came from. He noticed everything, which had always been his most unfair quality. My book was supposed to be about a little fox afraid of the ocean, but lately the fox kept ending up in a half-built house with wide windows and a porch facing the rain. My editor, Marisol, called on a Tuesday and asked gently why the story had suddenly become emotionally invested in residential architecture. I looked across the room at Miles, who was sitting on the floor with blueprints spread around him while Waffles slept on his measuring tape. No reason, I said. Artists are mysterious. Artists are usually hungry, she replied. Eat lunch. After the call, Miles looked up. She told you to eat, did she not? That is confidential publishing information. He stood, went to the fridge, and came back with leftover soup. Your confidentiality is reheated. It became too easy to laugh with him again. That was the problem. Panic could be managed. Awkwardness could be managed. But happiness was harder. Happiness made a person careless. One rainy afternoon, Chloe came by with a box of wedding favors she claimed she had forgotten to give us, though I suspected she mostly wanted to inspect the situation with her own eyes. She found Miles installing a floating shelf above my desk, while I stood below holding screws in a coffee mug. Waffles sat on the windowsill like a tiny judge. Chloe paused in the doorway, took in the scene, and said, interesting. Very temporary. Very unrelated to marriage. I nearly dropped the mug. Miles did not even turn around. Hello, Chloe. She hugged me first, because she enjoyed making her brother wait for affection. Then she whispered, "Blink twice if he has started labeling your pantry." He alphabetized the spices. That is basically a love language for men with toolboxes. I gave her a warning look, but she only grinned. Before she left, she airdropped me a folder of photos and videos from the wedding weekend. "For memory recovery," she said brightly. "Or blackmail. Depends on how boring you both decide to be." I did not open it until later that night, after Miles had gone to check on the house renovation and Waffles had fallen asleep in the laundry basket. The apartment was quiet, washed in the blue glow of my laptop. I clicked through photos first, Chloe laughing under her tangled veil, Miles and me dancing, my bare feet on the sidewalk, the pink chapel sign glowing behind us. Then I found a video titled Moonlight Vows Full Ceremony. My hand froze on the trackpad. I told myself not to watch it alone. Then I watched it alone. The screen filled with the chapel's fake stars and Marlene's rhinestone glasses. There I was, nervous and laughing, wearing Miles's jacket like I belonged inside it. Then Miles took my hands. The room in the video seemed to grow. Still around him. He was not swaying. He was not confused. His voice was low, careful, and clear. "I spent years thinking love had to arrive in a form I recognized," he said on the screen. Then I realized it had been sitting beside me in every waiting room, every grocery aisle, every bad day, every quiet morning. It was there when you remembered my mother's favorite flowers. It was there when you made my father laugh for the first time in months. It was there every time you made a place feel less empty just by walking into it. My throat tightened so suddenly I had to press my hand over my mouth. On the screen, past me was crying and trying to pretend he was not. Miles smiled at me with a softness I had never let myself believe was mine. "I do not know the perfect word for everything I feel," he continued. "But I know this. If ordinary life is what we get, bills and bad weather and burned toast, and growing older one Tuesday at a time, then you are the person I want beside me when it happens." The video blurred. I realized my eyes were full of tears. For days, I had been terrified that the marriage meant too much to me and not enough to him. But the truth was worse and better than that. Miles had remembered because Miles had chosen to remember. And suddenly the ring on my finger did not feel like a question anymore. It felt like an answer I was afraid to trust. When Miles came home that night, the rain had turned the windows silver. He stepped inside carrying a paper bag from the Thai place downstairs, his hair damp from the walk between his truck and the building, his cheeks pink from the cold. Waffles trotted over like a tiny orange supervisor, inspected his shoes, and accepted the tribute of Miles bending down to scratch behind his ears. It was such an ordinary sight that for one painful second I almost closed the laptop and pretended I had not watched anything. I almost let the evening become dinner, cat food, wet jackets, and another careful silence. But the video was still open behind me, paused on Miles's face under the fake chapel moon, and my heart was tired of protecting both of us from the truth. "Chloe sent the ceremony video," I said. Miles went still. The paper bag crinkled in his hand. "You watched it?" It was not a question. "Yes." He set the food on the counter with far too much care, like the containers might break if he moved too quickly. "Evan, I was going to tell you." When my voice came out softer than I expected, which somehow made it worse. "Before the 30 days ended? After the annulment? At my next birthday? In another 11 years when we accidentally retire together?" He flinched at that, not dramatically, just enough for me to see it. I did not know how. I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "You knew how in Las Vegas. That was different. Because we were under plastic stars? Because I was not thinking about consequences." He ran a hand through his damp hair, then looked at me with the helpless honesty of a man who could build a house from the foundation up, but could not find the first sentence for his own heart. I meant every word. That is the problem. The room went quiet except for the rain and Waffles batting at the loose handle of the paper bag. I wrapped my arms around myself. That is not usually what people call a problem. It is when I do not know what it makes me. There it was. The sentence I had been afraid of. Not cruel, not rejecting, just uncertain enough to hurt. I looked at him, at this man who had loved me in practical gestures for years and still seemed afraid of the shape that love made when spoken out loud. "Miles, I cannot be your crisis." His face tightened. "You are not. I cannot be the thing you try on because one night got too honest. That is not what this is." "Then what is it?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time since I had known him, silence did not feel like comfort. It felt like a door closing very slowly. I nodded, because if I did not move, I might start crying in a way I could not joke my way out of. That is what I thought. Evan. No, please. I need a minute. I went to the bedroom and shut the door, not hard, because we did not do dramatic exits. We did quiet damage. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the ring on my finger until it blurred. I had spent years believing the safest way to love Miles was to never ask for anything love-shaped in return. Now he had given me vows, a ring, a temporary home, and somehow still not the one thing I needed most, clarity. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up. Coffee waited in the pot, and beside it was a note in his neat handwriting, at the house. I will give you space. He had taken his work boots, his blueprints, and the jacket from the hook by the door. His toothbrush was still in the bathroom. His ring, I noticed with a strange cold drop in my stomach, was not on the edge of the sink. I told myself that was good. Then I saw it later, beside the toolbox he had forgotten under the kitchen table, silver and silent on a folded shop towel. He must have taken it off while fixing the leaking pipe the night before. He must have forgotten to put it back on. There were a dozen reasonable explanations, and every single one felt useless. I had a meeting with Marisol that afternoon at a small cafe near Powell's, the kind with uneven tables and oat milk in glass bottles. She studied the latest pages of my Fox book while I stirred my coffee until it went cold. The art is beautiful, she said gently, but your little fox keeps running away at the end. I looked down at the final sketch. She was right. In every version, the fox reached the warm house on the hill, saw the light in the window, and turned back toward the woods. Maybe the house is not safe, I said. Marisol tilted her head. Or maybe the fox is afraid it is. That sentence followed me all the way home through the rain. The apartment was empty when I returned, except for Waffles asleep in my laundry basket and the ring still waiting by the toolbox. I picked it up and held it in my palm. It was warm from nothing, heavy with everything. I love Miles Carter. I had loved him through birthdays, bad haircuts, moving days, grief, soup, silence, and 11 years of almost. But for the first time, I understood that loving someone did not mean making myself small enough to fit inside their fear. I could survive losing a husband I had never planned to have. I did not know if I could survive losing Miles. But I was beginning to understand that I could not keep losing myself just to keep him. The family dinner was Chloe's idea, which meant it arrived with a cheerful text message, 3 heart emojis, and absolutely no opportunity to refuse. She claimed it was just a simple Sunday meal at her father's house in Cannon Bay before she and her wife left for their honeymoon. But Chloe Carter had never done anything simply in her life. By 5 o'clock, Miles and I were in his truck heading west through soft Oregon rain. With Waffles temporarily entrusted to my downstairs neighbor and the silver ring tucked in my jacket pocket because I still could not decide whether wearing it would be hope or self-harm. Miles drove with both hands on the wheel, his jaw set, his own ring back on his finger. I had noticed the second he arrived at my apartment that afternoon. He had not mentioned it. Neither had I. The silence between us was not empty, but it was crowded with things neither of us had learned how to carry. His father's house sat a few blocks from the water, a weathered blue place with white trim, cedar shingles, and a porch light that always made me think of coming in from the cold. I had spent half my teenage years there, eating grilled cheese at the kitchen counter while Miles did homework with the intensity of a courtroom witness. Mr. Carter greeted me the way he always did, with one firm hug and a quiet, "Good to see you, Evan," as if I had never been anything less than family. That almost broke me before dinner even started. Chloe noticed the tension in exactly 4 seconds. By the time we sat down to roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and the kind of dinner rolls that could make a person believe in forgiveness, she had glanced between us at least 12 times. Her wife, Nora, wisely focused on buttering bread. Everything might have stayed bearable if Mr. Carter had not asked about Vegas photos. Chloe brightened with dangerous speed. "Oh, I have videos," she said. My fork stopped halfway to my plate. Miles looked up. "Chloe, what?" "Wedding videos. Normal wedding videos. Legal wedding videos." The room froze. Her smile faded as she realized her mouth had outrun her strategy. Mr. Carter looked between us. "Legal." Nobody spoke. Somewhere in the kitchen, the old refrigerator hummed like it wanted no part of this. I felt every old instinct rise in me at once. Make it funny, make it small, make it my fault so Miles would not have to stand in the center of the room with everyone looking at him. I put my napkin down and forced a laugh that sounded too thin. It was just a ridiculous Vegas mistake, I began. We were tired, and there was a chapel, and honestly the whole thing is already being handled, so nobody needs to worry. Miles's chair scraped back before I could finish. He stood so abruptly that everyone turned to him. His face was pale, but his voice, when it came, was steady. No, one word, quiet and solid. I looked up at him. He was not looking at Chloe or Nora or even his father. He was looking at me. It was not just a ridiculous mistake, he said. And Evan should not have to turn himself into the joke because I was afraid to tell the truth. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. Miles placed his left hand on the table, ring visible beneath the warm dining room light. I married him in Las Vegas, he said. The paperwork is real. The surprise was real. But what I said to him was also real. Mr. Carter sat very still. Chloe's eyes filled immediately. Nora reached for her hand. Miles swallowed, then looked at his father. I know this may take time. I know I have spent most of my life giving everyone simple answers because simple answers made me feel safe. I thought being certain meant never changing. But I am learning that certainty can also mean knowing who feels like home, even before you know exactly what to call it. His voice shook once, but he did not stop. I do not have a perfect label ready for you. I do not have a speech that makes this neat. I only know that when I imagine the ordinary parts of my future, the coffee, the rain, the grocery lists, the house I am trying to fix, Evan is there. He has been there for years. And I am tired of pretending that does not mean what it means. No one moved. My eyes burned, but I refused to look away from him. Mr. Carter stared at his son for a long moment, his expression unreadable in a way that reminded me painfully of Miles. Then he exhaled, slow and heavy, and looked down at the table. I am surprised, he said. Chloe made a small, wounded sound, but he raised one hand gently. I am surprised. I am not angry. Miles's shoulders dropped, as if he had been holding up the roof. Mr. Carter looked at me then, his eyes softer, older. Evan has been part of this family since he was 16 years old. I may need a minute to understand the shape of this, but I do not need a minute to know that. Something inside me gave way. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the room to blur at the edges. Chloe stood first and came around the table, wrapping both arms around Miles, then dragging me into the hug before I could escape. Nora laughed through her tears. Mr. Carter cleared his throat and asked if anyone wanted more rolls, which was his way of surviving emotion without leaving the table. Under the cover of everyone moving again, Miles reached for my hand. This time, I did not make a joke. I did not pull away. His fingers closed around mine, careful and warm, and for the first time since Las Vegas, the silence between us felt less like fear and more like the beginning of an answer. 30 days after Las Vegas, Miles and I sat in Linda Park's office with the rain sliding down the windows behind us and a manila folder resting on the desk between us like a final exam neither of us had studied for properly. Linda looked exactly the same as she had the first time, calm, polished, and mildly prepared for disaster. You have options, she said, folding her hands. If you both still want the annulment, I can file today. The words still landed softly but firmly in the room. I looked at the folder. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways over the past month. In some versions, I was brave and dignified. In others, I cried in the parking lot while eating gas station candy. In the worst one, Miles signed first without looking at me. But the man sitting beside me was not reaching for a pen. He was holding another folder on his lap, thicker than Linda's, the corners slightly bent from being carried around too long. Actually, Miles said, I brought something. Linda raised one eyebrow. That is either very romantic or very concerning. Possibly both, I murmured. Miles opened the folder and slid a set of blueprints across the desk toward me. I recognized the old craftsman house immediately. The wide porch, the narrow upstairs windows, the backyard shaded by 2 maple trees. But the plans were different now. The back room, the one he had always called storage, had been redrawn with north-facing windows, built-in shelves, a long work table, and a small note in Miles's precise handwriting. Evan's studio. My throat closed before I could speak. Miles turned toward me, nervous in a way he no longer tried to hide. I did not put that there because I assumed anything, he said. I put it there because when I imagine that house finished, I imagine your pencils on the table, waffles sleeping in the sun, and you complaining that my coffee is too strong even while drinking half of it. Linda quietly stood and said she needed to check on a printer. There was no printer in the direction she walked, but I appreciated the lie. Miles took a breath. We can undo the paperwork if that is what you want. I do not want a technical accident to trap you. I do not want you to stay because I made vows before I understood how to say them in daylight. He touched the ring on his finger, then looked at me with the steadiness I had loved since we were teenagers. But I do not want to erase the truth inside it either. I love you, Evan. I am still learning what that means for me, and I know I should have been braver sooner. But I am not confused about you. The rain tapped gently against the glass. Somewhere outside, traffic hissed over wet pavement. I thought about the fox in my book, always reaching the warm house and turning back because safety felt too impossible to trust. I thought about 11 years of almost, about grocery aisles and waiting rooms, about the chapel's plastic stars, and Mr. Carter passing me dinner rolls with wet eyes. Then I reached for Miles's hand. I do not want to be trapped, I said. His face went pale. I smiled before fear could take him too far. But I might be willing to be asked properly. For 1 second, he stared at me. Then his laugh broke out, quiet and breathless, like sunlight finding a crack in the clouds. Evan Brooks, he said, would you go on a first date with your husband? That depends. Is he emotionally available now? He is working on it. Does he still alphabetize spices? Unfortunately, yes. Then I suppose I can give him one dinner. We did file something that day, but it was not the annulment. It was a delay, a pause, a little space for two people who had done everything backward and still wanted to do the rest carefully. 3 months later, I stood in a small bookstore in Portland with my first children's book stacked on a table beside me. The cover showed a little fox standing in front of a warm house on a rainy hill. My hands shook as I signed copies, but every time I looked up, Miles was there near the back, holding my coat, smiling like being ordinary together was the greatest adventure of his life. Mr. Carter came too, awkward and gentle, bringing flowers he said were from the garden but were obviously from a grocery store. Chloe cried before page 3. Nora bought 6 copies. Waffles, banned from the store for reasons involving a previous incident with a display of bookmarks, waited at home in the studio that now smelled like cedar, coffee, and watercolor paper. That night, Miles and I sat on the porch of the half-finished house, wrapped in one blanket while rain whispered through the maple leaves. The rings on our hands were still cheap silver. We had talked about replacing them someday, maybe with something stronger, something chosen in daylight. But not yet. I liked them as they were. Proof that love did not always arrive neatly. Sometimes it stumbled in wearing yesterday's dress shirt, holding paperwork nobody expected, asking 2 frightened people to become honest. Miles rested his shoulder against mine. What happens to the fox at the end? He asked. I looked through the window at the little studio glowing behind us. She stays, I said. And for the first time in my life, that felt like the bravest ending I knew.